So hello everyone and welcome to our talk show. I'm Joana Osorio, I'm project lead of Open Pharma, and Open Pharma is a collaboration that aims to improve the communication of pharma-sponsored research. And this talk show focuses on the needs of the audiences of research. And we have a fantastic group of speakers, and this talk show is going to be chaired by our Open Pharma chair, Richard Smith, who is chair of the UK Health Alliance on Climate Change, the Point of Care Foundation and Patients Know Best, and co-chair of the Lancet Commission on the Value of Death. And he was also the editor of BMJ and chief executive of the BMJ Publishing Group. If we welcome all questions, please use the Q&A and not the chat to ask your questions, and they will be sent to the panelists. So over to Richard, and I hope you enjoy it.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Joanna. So welcome, everybody. So we're going to be discussing the question, what does the world want from pharma research communications? Does it want higher quality research, more access to the full text, access to the raw data, faster access, perhaps through preprints, plain language versions, videos, podcasts, fewer studies that are more marketing than science? These are some of the things we might find ourselves discussing. And we're going to be having a conversation. It's not going to be a panel where people make 5-minute speeches and people will jump backwards and forwards. So here to discuss this question, we've got Kajsa Wilhelmsson, who is a lawyer by background. She's the acting director of the Oxford Health Policy Forum, and she's a huge experience of health systems and policy change, working across political, media, and corporate environments. We've also got Venkat Narayan. Venkat is a doctor and researcher. He's the executive director of the Emory Global Diabetes Research Center and a professor at Emory University School of Medicine, and he's a member of the National Academy of Medicine, so he's very distinguished. He's lots of experience doing research in low and middle income countries. Venkat and I have worked together a lot, and he's a radical and even, I would suggest, an iconoclast. And he's standing in at very short notice for Denis Xavier, who unfortunately wasn't able to come, although he was hoping he could. And Venkat will have to leave a couple of minutes before we finish. And then we've got Paul Sims, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Impatient Health, not inpatient, but impatient, get it, I hope. He's often described as the pharma provocateur for rethinking and realizing the huge unfulfilled potential of the life sciences industry. And he counts many of the industry's CEOs and innovators amongst his friends. So at least 2 provocateurs we've got. I suspect we may have 4. And then fourthly, we've got Durhane Wong-Rieger. Durhane is the chair of Rare Disease International. She's the chair of the Asia Pacific Rare Disease International and treasurer of United Nations Non-Governmental Organization for Rare Diseases. She's also the president and CEO of the Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders and many other organizations. And a psychologist and academic by background, she's a certified health coach. Right. Well, why don't we kick off with the overall question? Only what is it not that the world wants, but what do you want from pharma research communications? Durhane, let me begin with you, if that's all right. What do you want?
Thank you so much for the introduction, for being part of this panel. I think as you went through all the people, but even in terms of my personal goals, I think what we recognize is that we want lots of things. And I think in this age, we want everything. And as you went through the opening, the question is, do we want to have easy to digest information, almost those bits that we can pick up, right, and be able to use? That's what, most of our patients are saying. I need to get the information. I need to get it quickly. I need to get it in a way that I can use it. And, as you say, I head up Rare Diseases International. So many of our patients belong to very small patient groups. There's very little information in many cases about their diseases. So what they want is something that can actually be useful for them. On the other hand, patients, including me, right, we come from a background. We have academic backgrounds, professional backgrounds. I have 2 children, both born with rare conditions. I want everything. I want the science. I want the research. I want to know where it is that we are, coming from. I've got a husband who's got Parkinson's. We want to track this and be able to say, is that for me? So this is speaking on a personal level, right? So most of us in the patient space, many of us as patient advocates, especially with rare, we're also people that have, diseases in our family. So we want the information to be useful, but we're also heads of patient organizations. We're also the intersection between the policymakers, the health systems. We're the ones that are also advocating for change. We're the ones that are saying we need to have it. So we need the whole realm of information. And I think that's, and the state of the world today is we kind of feel like, okay, we should be able to get it all, and we should be able to get it out quickly, and we should be able to get it out accurately. So the answer, Richard, is we want everything, and we want it right.
Venkat, you want everything?
Yeah, sure. But let me tell you where my priorities are. I mean, this is good, a good opening here. I mean, firstly, I'm an academic. I've never done research for any pharma product directly, or never been funded directly by pharma for any of their research. But as both as a researcher and as a consumer of pharma products, that's where my reflection comes from. So I feel when you talk of research, all research, whether it's pharma research or government research or foundation research, it needs to be held to the same standard, number one. And that standard to me is the integrity of science and the quality and rigor of science. So I expect pharma to insist on high rigorous, high quality science. What does that mean? To me, that means very clearly the science has to be ethical, and it has to focus on an important question. I mean, when you look at a lot of new drugs coming out, they tend to be compared against a placebo. I find that problematic. I think pharma trials should compare a new drug against an existing standard, so that me as a scientist or as a consumer know what the marginal improvement is and at what cost. I mean, that is the question, and at what side effect. That's the question I'm trying to pay attention to. So is this new drug that's supposed to be a blockbuster, is it compared against an existing standard or available drug? And if so, what are the additional benefits? What are the additional costs? And are there any side effects that I should be worried about? That's something that I need to know. And thirdly, I want to know what population has been studied. Is it a population that is representative of the market to which this drug is going to be sold to or promoted to? In other words, as a consumer, I want to know what the average person who took part in the study looks like, what the range of people who took part in the study looks like, so that there is good representation. So I don't want to see a study done in very rich, or white people now suddenly being promoted to China or India or Brazil. I want to see a more diverse ethnic mixture of the population kind. And I also don't want to see the drug trial being done in a certain very exclusive population and then be broadly generalized to all kinds of people. And particularly when it comes to off-label, I'm very concerned that the outcome for which the trial was done reflects the outcome that the off-label is suddenly being done for. I think so that, and then finally, I like to see a lot of transparency. I like to see, for example, a clear account of how the trial was done, where it was done, what was the population, what was the outcome, how much exclusion happened, was the trial stopped early, all the rigorous thing that we hold a trial standard to. And the best integrity for science is openness of data. So I would argue when you complete the trial, make the data set available with your paper so that anybody can reanalyze it and verify your findings. So I think those would be my standards.
Right. So you want the raw data, you want transparency, you want full information, and most of all, you want really useful research. And it sounds from the way you say it that you're a bit worried you don't get those things all the time, but we'll come back to that in a minute. So Kajsa, what do you want? And do you worry about the things that we've heard so far?
No, Durhane is absolutely right, but I think it's more generally, I don't think the world wants anything from pharma research communication, because I don't think the world knows there is pharma research communication at all. But I think if questioned, anyone would say, I want to have the possibility and right to access, evaluate, and consume knowledge around pharmaceuticals, around how they have come about and how they should be used and how they can impact me if I'm going to take that pill or that shot. Basically, that is sort of because it is about our bodies and what we do with them. And that's sort of, and we should have the right to know everything there is to know if we want to. But most people probably don't want to actually access all of it and know that it's even out there. But those that do should have that right.
So, Kajsa, do you think pharmaceutical companies should be saying, look at all this research that's there, you can access too? Should they almost be advertising the research?
I don't think it depends on sort of, it's probably a good business idea, but no, I don't think they have to, but I think they have to be open with all. They should be an open book. It doesn't necessarily had to be advertised, marketing, and pushed down the throats of people. It's a question of actually going to the library and being allowed to access it when you want to, when you have a need for it.
Right, so you should be able to have access to original research, but do you think that most people actually want, trusted, summarized information that tells them about effects and side effects, and that's enough for most people?
I think many people even don't go there, but looking at my great-grandma, she wouldn't trust any information or anyone. I'm really sorry, it wouldn't help how much professor and how much titles you have. She would anyway look at the raw data and make her own assessment at the age of 97, and it actually saved her life because the doctor had prescribed her the wrong medicine. So this with trusted data is, that might work for some. And we who are more paranoid and saying that, I mean, I am a lawyer by training. I don't trust anyone. I look at the argument back and forth, and then I make my own conclusions. And I think a lot of people are like me, but not all. And they might want information, whatever that is.
Paul, what is it you want from your particular perspective? You're kind of inside the pharmaceutical industry, really, aren't you? Or you're prodding them from
I don't work for a pharmaceutical company, so let's make that very clear. But what I want is trust. It's been mentioned in passing a couple of times. I want trust and I want accessibility. And the funny thing is that I think that we think that trust is generated through accuracy and through transparency. I think those are just two of a very wide spectrum of what actually creates trust. The funny thing is we know how to do it in our personal lives, don't we? If you go on a date with someone, you don't read out your CV and then expect that you're going to have a successful date. That's transparency, that's information, but that's not enough.
That's where I've been going wrong, obviously.
That's where you've been going wrong, Richard. We'll talk about this afterwards. So we know that humanity and compassion and understanding and all of these other elements are vital to creating trust in our personal lives. For some reason, we forget them when we move into our professional. And what really upsets me is that I think that many of the topics that we've discussed today are important, but they're already on the right trajectory. And there are some parts of the spectrum that just get completely forgotten about. And when Venkat says, off-label communications can't be trusted, well, if the trust was there in the first place, then I don't think we'd have as much of a problem. If you're basically suspicious. You believe that there's ulterior motives. You believe that you're not getting the full picture. So and by the way, the new generation, the younger generation, is the least sort of brand loyal, the least loyal of any kind of generation that's ever existed before. They're going to be caring much more about how you got there than the actual destination itself. And that's seen in every media consumption that Generation Z or Z and even Generation Alpha, the youngest, so this is an inevitability, is what I'm trying to say. It's an inevitability. It's like the making of DVD is more interesting than the movie, and you have to make sure that the guts hanging out. We're perfectionists, and we shouldn't be, because actually showing the reality of how you got there is what drives that authenticity, even before you get to the accuracy of the information.
So you want trust more than anything. I mean, I think I'm right in saying if you rank industries, unfortunately, despite all that they did during the pandemic, pharmaceutical industries come pretty close to the bottom, sort of just above tobacco companies. So why is that, and what can they do about that? And is that one of the things that influences how people perceive their research?
To me, it seems bloody obvious, and I don't think pharma deserves to have a better reputation, despite its so-called life-saving products. It doesn't deserve a better reputation than it have, because it's so opaque. It doesn't understand that the accuracy and the volume of the information is not the only criteria, and there are many other criteria.
Right. Durhane, do you trust the pharmaceutical industry?
I actually don't trust anybody, so that's a good starting point. And I have a strong kind of a visceral reaction to what Paul said, because you think of the fact that 3/4 of marriages end in divorce. I'm not sure how much you can trust your gut instincts in terms of the person that you've been swiping right or left on, and once you get in real life. But that's a different story. I love your analogy, though, despite that. For me, can I take it in a slightly different direction, Richard?
Sure.
I was listening to Venkat as well. We also, have a lot of patient organizations that we work with in low middle income countries. And that's one of the big reasons why Rare Disease International came about, was really trying to expand access to, emerging healthcare system, emerging populations. But beyond that, I don't think for me, the new paradigm has got to be, and it is happening, is that it isn't pharma doing research there, physicians kind of being the sort of the handmaiden to doing it in many cases, and then the patients and the rest of the public out here. What we've got to do is open it up. And I trust what I can be inside of. I trust what I'm actually a partner to in the design of. I trust. So it isn't a matter of you do the research and can I get access to your protocols and the information afterwards. The whole notion now of patient-centered research, patient engagement in research, is you want to bring the patient in. And the patient is not anywhere close to perfect, but the patient is supposed to have a decision-making role in many cases. The patient actually becomes a partner without becoming a compromised partner. But we do supposedly get the access. And this is beyond pharma. Actually, pharma does a better job than the policymakers. Again, what I don't trust is where the health systems are going. What I don't trust is the monies that sometimes goes into health systems, and you look up and say, wait a minute, what happened to us? And so I think, again, we've got a meeting, one of our partners, recently now with Rare Disease International is the WHO. And what we want to do is be sitting side by side there to say, let's design these systems for us to be a partner in it. So what people are asking for us now is, I don't want to just receive the information. I want to be a part of designing the information. I want to be a part of generating the information. I want to be a part of the analysis. Before you do that analysis, show it to us and let us tell you whether or not it makes any sense. The last part I'll say, and again, I was thinking of what Venkat was saying, which was so really powerful, is once that drug is approved, and for many of us, we have therapies that we want to bring in on short clinical trials, and never mind the placebo, there's no standard of care. We want to get it as soon as possible because it may be the only and the first life-saving therapy. So we balance off the benefits and risks, but that means we have to have really robust, real-world research, not another clinical trial, but where are systems that collect the information about people as they're actually receiving this. And I think this is what the COVID lesson said, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff happening there after we rushed these, vaccines out, which we needed to do. And what we didn't do is have a proper dialogue with the public to say, you're part of our laboratory now. We're going to bring this out. And we're going to have to be fess up and say, we don't know everything. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what long-term is. So you need to be a partner in this with us. And rather than saying, oh my gosh, we didn't get it right, you didn't get it right, and everybody accusing you, you're hiding information. No, you're part of this with us. You give us information, you help us analyze the information. We're doing this together.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly here, when you submit something to the National Institute for Health Research, if you want to do a study, you've got to explain how patients are part of it. And I know at the BMJ, they look for that when they're reviewing papers, and they use patients as peer reviewers. So I want to ask Venkat about that in a minute, but I think, Paul, you wanted to respond to this. I saw you.
Oh, I just wanted to say that's exactly what I meant by humanity. It's being able to show the bad as well as the good, the truth, the honest, how you got there, including the failures and the story all the way along, and to actually treat patients as partners, collaborators, and to recognize that so much of the intelligence around the disease does come from the patient as well.
But there's a problem with publishing failures generally. That's not unique to the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, I once asked the director of the Medical Research Council what proportion of all the research he funded he thought was published. And he said, well, probably less. I don't know was the real answer, but probably less than a fifth, because a lot of it's stuff that doesn't work and doesn't get published. But you want to see as many, well, there's probably more failures than successes. You'd like to see those too?
Even if I didn't work in pharma, I'd want to see that. I mean, think of just the wasted repetition of studies where people are doing things that have already failed. I mean, for that reason alone. But yeah, that's the thing. Like, pharmaceutical companies need to recognize that showing the bad stuff doesn't necessarily give a bad impression. It actually gives a more authentic and real impression. And that is a very difficult mindset for a very perfectionist, life or death, safety first industry, conservative industry to ever understand. But it is absolutely how we need to go.
Yeah, it makes me think of when I was at the BMJ, we used to publish obituaries, and every single doctor, although I met a lot of dodgy doctors when they were alive, once they were dead, they were all saints. The saints incentive. So Venkat, do you do research with patients, and especially in low and middle income countries?
Sure.
Do you think it would improve the quality and usefulness of research?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to slightly reframe this conversation. When we talk of research by pharma, I think we should view pharma as part of a larger ecosystem. And like, for example, there is government research which generates ideas and data, which then pharma pick up. There is research done by marketing or by foundations about potential user groups. So I think it's an ecosystem. So trying to partition the different funders of research or doers of research is a problem. And I think that should be acknowledged. I think, we need conversation across these different players so that there is some uniform standards to how research is done and how one group influences the other. I think that's important, and number one. And secondly, what is the goal of research? I think trying to align that goal is going to be important. And this is where Paul's point about bringing humanity into the fore or patient benefit into the fore is important. So if the goal of research is to try and improve knowledge that is going to improve human welfare, human health, that's a different matter than the goal of research being pure commodification and profit making. I understand, and I think we need to examine why pharma gets so into prioritizing profit making is because they do a lot of new research and develop a lot of products, but the majority of their products are essentially failures. And even the few products that they create are often done against placebo. These are Me Too products. So the truly important new discoveries, the new things that change the world, are few and far between. So perhaps they need to strategize better of where it is better to do fewer studies, fewer products, but more ethically, broadly, better, and in collaboration with the other players. I think that is going to be extremely important. I think that those are two things that need to change. I think then they have to have, I'm always amazed, why is there such variation in the cost of insulin within a country, between countries, and do the newer insulins really make the difference that they claim to do? And I think that's an important question. So patient affordability and patient convenience should be right and center of any pharma company's work. If you are good at innovating the cutting edge work, like, for example, Merck might do something or another company might do something, partner with other industries in, say, India or Israel or Brazil, who can take the product to a full-scale market. So think of the bottom end of the pyramid as you're developing the thing. So it is not enough to think of a product that's supposed to be Rolls-Royce, which is going to be available to 10 million people. Think of your market as 7 billion people or 6 billion people, and align your strategic partnership upfront. Bring in the scientists, bring in the network for distribution ahead of time, so that it's better to lower the cost and make it available to larger numbers of people of an ethical product. So I think that should be the way we should go about it. So, when you look at the COVID's been spoken about. There's a lot of very nice examples from COVID. We came up with the mRNA, which was largely used in high and middle, high income countries. But then the viral vaccines is what has helped the pandemic stop in many countries, including India, China, etc. So I think we need to learn from these lessons. So it may not be one size fits all, but it is very important to connect the world of research, connect the world of the market, and optimize the systems in a way that everybody benefits, with the central goal being health and affordability and access.
Yeah, no, I think you make a good point. We think of pharmaceutical research as part of the sort of overall ecology of research. And in some way, that's what led to Open Pharma, because, as you know, roughly half of biomedical research is funded by pharmaceutical companies. And there was a sense that when it came to more modern ways of publishing, like open access and sharing raw data and using preprints, the industry was lagging a long way behind. And we thought, is there any reason why that needs to be the case? Durhane, I saw you nodding, sort of excited almost by what Venkat was saying. So
like if I had
weigh in.
I would, if he were here, I would have hugged him. Actually, what I wanted to do is see if I can co-opt him to do some stuff for us. And there was a couple of comments he made that was so exciting. And that is, when we're talking about, and research, as he said, is an ecosystem. It doesn't start, with designing and discovering a drug and then bringing it to market and then it ends. It is, and it's not just around the drug, right? It's around the system. And part of that system for patients is, how do we get access to it? The sad thing about it is that, and I'll use again, rare diseases is my, kind of small environment. About 10% of the people that should benefit from a drug get access to it in very developed countries. Around the world, less than 1% of people who could benefit from a drug get access to it. And then you think about, the companies that are producing these drugs and they're marketing them. And Paul, you probably know a lot better. They're marketing them to the idea that I'm going to get a 10% population back. What if we said we could do it for the world? And I think about what happened with hepatitis C, which was done difficultly, but it could have been done well. And that is, what if a company came out with these, innovative molecules, or even an old molecule, it doesn't matter. And we had an immediate program that says, how do we make them available to everybody? And rather than worry about, will we have compulsory licensing and will countries try to take it? What if we actually had an open agreement that says, we can market to the high end, this is what it will be, and we will have an agreement. We will give it to, or have an agreement on how it can be developed, right? In a Indian or other, environment where it will be available to lots of people. I think the profits there would be for everybody. So, and it would also need some foundations as well. But I think it's a whole new, paradigm of how do we not only develop drugs, but how do we get them to the right people? And then you've got a whole environment that's going to give you feedback on how well they work that were not part of your original clinical trial. So, yeah, I would love to see what Venkat was talking about become sort of the paradigm for the world.
Yeah, so we're talking about changing the whole business model of pharmaceutical companies. But to relate it specifically to publications, I'll come to you with this one, Kajsa, if it's all right. And somebody's asked, do people need to see financial transparency? Would that help people trust pharma companies? And I'm imagining that's in the trials, as well as in the whole business practice. Do you think more financial information and perhaps every trial to include an economic evaluation or something like that? Would that be useful, Kajsa?
I think that the effort to go into and actually the sunshine registries and telling which physicians that are your consultants And when you publish something, to actually be transparent on who you have had assignments for is incredibly important. Do we need to go further? I'm not necessarily convinced. What I think would be very helpful would be if the pharma industry would dare publishing in their own name a little bit more often instead of giving out grants. And I'm saying this with slight hesitation, as I am actually leading an organization living on grants. So of course that goes for all other efforts, but not the ones you're going to do with me, please. So, can I also make a point on a previous topic? Because you were actually wrong, as so often, and that is on trust. Healthcare industry in general is the second most trusted after technology. Technology being, in general, our mobile phones, the things we use every day, the things we know will break and not work, but we trust them more. But after that, there's no other industry that is more trusted. Their differentiation, and I worked for 9 years with the Elman Trust Barometer, looking in through all the raw data. It's amazing. Pharma industry always believe they are not trusted. In reality, they are more trusted than most.
But if you made it health sector, that includes doctors and hospitals, whereas if you make it doctors and hospitals on one side and pharma.
No, companies. So yes, if it is private hospitals, yes. Private healthcare insurance, yes, but not NHS, for example. So it is the industry as such. And what's even more fascinating is if, because they don't publish this, but it's which companies of the pharma companies that are the most trusted. It isn't necessarily the ones who have worked for almost 30 years in the industry in one way or another would trust the most, but people's trust it's as random as in dating, to the previous discussion.
Can I take the point there?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry. Which of the pharmaceutical companies made no profit in the production of the COVID vaccine? And I'm sure you know the answer, but the question is, did they receive a more trustworthy and a more streamlined approach in the market as a result of that? Probably not, you would have to argue. And so, recently Pfizer has announced to give away a significant part of its portfolio to the developing world, and does that get recognized? I don't think it particularly does, unfortunately. I don't think it's known outside some very closed industry circles. And obviously it's a relatively new announcement, and you could argue that it's because they made so much money during the last 2 or 3 years that they're able to do that. But there doesn't seem to be a direct link between what a company does to be generous, as it were, to the world and its reputation. So I think we read a little bit more into the financials than we should. It's not an excuse, obviously, but I think once again, trust is generated through so many different. It's a full spectrum of emotions, and we are very one-track minded in thinking it might just be about one or two of them.
One of the questions we had in advance, and I think I know the answer that two of you will give, was that, are patients actually a valid audience for pharma research, or is this a bit sort of aspirational? Kajsa described it as a sort of right to have access to the research, but acknowledge that many people don't want to. And if they are a valid resource, should pharmaceutical companies make more effort to present the material in a more acceptable way through plain language summaries and maybe videos and podcasts and such like? I think I know your answer, Durhane. So let me ask Venkat that, because he might be skeptical. Because Dennis, when we were talking to him the other day, was skeptical. He said most of my patients don't want to see pharmaceutical research.
I mean, I don't think you can think of patients as some homogeneous entity. You're bound to have a very heterogeneous distribution. Some want information, others may not, and others are happy for others to interpret the information from them. That said, I think it's good standard to insist that information communicated in scientific journals is also communicated in a way that the average person with a decent intelligence can understand. So I was, again, you've been an editor of a journal. One thing I would throw back to journals is that when you publish articles, particularly of a product or anything that's relevant to the people and to patient care, perhaps we should also insist that the article includes one-page clear information to the public. If you're going to put out a video, in a 2-minute video that describes the benefits, and these are also vetted and peer-reviewed, I think that way it becomes dissemination becomes part of the art of science and its communication. So I think that would be wonderful to do. I think so. Yeah.
So that actually fits with a question we've got here from Ashley Farley, who says, do you think that publishers play a role in helping communicate these complexities with the general population? And are they doing this well now? Maybe I could get your view first, Paul, and then I'll come to Durhane.
I don't know very much about publications, so I don't think I can actually answer that question, I'm afraid. What I did think was actually, no, let's go to someone else on that, and I'll come back later.
Okay, Durhane, what do you think?
Interesting, I sit as an editor on a couple of journals as well. Interesting, one of them is called The Patient, which is patient-centered research, which I think is aptly titled, but it's not, articles are not written by patients, and the audience is not really the patient, but it is, patient-centered in some interesting way. Yeah, think about, now we'll go back to maybe what Venkat was saying as well. Who do the patients trust? They trust people that they know. It's maybe back to your notion of Paul. I trust the person that I know, that I've seen. And so the question is, can we get the information to our trusted intermediaries? Patient organizations are really trying to step up to play that role. And we have people come to us all the time. What does this mean? Should I do this? Is this the right way to go? And what we need to have is access to the information. We need to be also cautious in terms of what we're saying so that we don't mislead, but we can't do that unless we've got the information. Now, the problem is that many of our organizations don't have somebody in the position of being that kind of a scientific advisor. It would be great if we did. There aren't Kajsa grants that are going to patient groups that are saying, here, we're going to fund your scientific advisor. It would be great if they did. So, but we do need to figure out how do we get that information to trusted sources for the patients, and the patients themselves aren't going to read it. We had a question come to us just this morning before I came on from, and it was about a company and about a product and about even a lawsuit that's taking place. And the question is, should we wade into it? And my answer is, I can't wade into it unless I actually have more information. Can we get the real information about it before because people are asking, which way should we look at this? So I think it is important, but I think we need to recognize maybe it's not the patient that is the audience, the patient organizations, the patient intermediaries, the trusted sources to the patients, which could include the physicians. But I would say, honestly, physicians in general don't have time to be that trusted intermediary. So it really, I do think we need to get access. And again, most of us, the first thing we do is we go Google it. And I think one of the challenges is there good information in Google. And I think that's actually something that we need to make sure that those sources that people are going to absolutely can lead them to, good sources and reliable sources. And that, of course, is a huge can of worms in and of itself.
Yeah, that relates to a question we've got here from Mulpi Elkins, which I may not have pronounced his or her name correctly. How can we help researchers communicate their research more effectively so their results are not misinterpreted or misunderstood by the public, given how pharma research can be very complex, containing technical jargons and complex data? And that relates, I think, to a question we had in advance about, is there a role, how can pharmaceutical companies counter a lot of misinformation that's out there? Some of it might have come from them, but a lot of it comes, particularly if you think of vaccines or whatever, from all sorts of crazy sources. You got something to say on that, Kajsa?
Isn't this exactly why it's so important that the pharma companies themselves communicate actively and directly to the people who will use their products? I know it's not a law allowed, and I think this is a big mistake, because that gives the space for others to fill out and give the information on their behalf, or sort of what they now make up around vaccines, etc. I really think that the most effective way to be trusted is to not use sort of a middleman, but to talk directly to the source, whether that is the researcher or the company. And I think it is incredibly important that that is clear, who actually have done the research, and that is the person doing the work. In that sense, I am slightly skeptic to these two videos and, dumbed down information, because it then doesn't come directly from the source anymore, from the researcher who truly knows the content.
Paul, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, the problem is oh, sorry, go on.
Particularly whether pharmaceutical companies can do something to counter misinformation. Yeah. But say whatever you were going to say and then think about that.
The truth is that roughly 2/3 of people trust the inner circle, whether that be a patient group, as Durhane said, or just their social media community or their family. They trust those sorts of information more than they trust the experts or the originator. I think it's obviously a little bit, I think it's a bit idealistic that the pharmaceutical company might be able to communicate directly with the patient in every instance. Unfortunately, that's just not the world in which good communication or effective communication is done. And when I say effective, I mean the stuff that's actually listened to. And it's not even vaccine denial, it's ChatGPT can't be trusted to provide accurate information. And that's supposedly a very mainstream tool that now has sparked an arms race, as you've just seen this week, between the different technology companies to produce a version of. And ironically, the latest one that was released this week was lampooned for its inability to get a question right during its advertisement for its very service. So, the reality is that information is going to come from third parties. And the reality is that, exactly as has already been said, that vacuum does need to be filled, because it will be filled by somebody, and that somebody might not be very accurate in their, or very accessible, or very whatever in their communication. So Pharma absolutely does have to get better at filling that void. Direct answer to the question, how do we get better? I think this is a problem that has plagued every scientist since forever. How do you make science accessible at all? There are people who are good at it, though. We have entire industries of scientific communicators that are trying to make it more accessible. And I just don't think it's an excuse anymore to simply only publish, as Venkat said, in a publication, and not provide anything to fill the inevitable void that somebody else is going to cover with the consumerized version of that information.
Well, one of the questions we had in advance was, how much should pharmaceutical companies get involved in social media? I come to you.
Can I just quickly say one more thing?
You're an enthusiast.
Can I just say one more thing? A lot of pharmaceutical companies will say, it's not my job. It's not my place to communicate in these places. That is rubbish. If your job is to hit patient outcomes, and you're going to be measured on whether or not you have secured patient outcomes, then communication, and even communication that you don't provide, is part of that equation in generating patient outcomes. Sorry.
Venkat?
Yeah, I was just going to say, the one conversation we need to bring in is the role of social media. Again, Jonathan Haidt, I think his name is, who's a researcher at NYU, psychologist, has spoken about why we are actually dumbing down society, because in a sense, what's happening is people with extreme views are the ones who communicate on social media more often. And the people in the middle hardly communicate, and there is never a debate. So you end up creating the perception that are driven very much by people at the extremes of beliefs, whatever those beliefs are, political, whatever, religious, whatever. So, and social media is here to stay. And I think in the future, like Paul said, just like the next generation is going to demand a very different kind of world, that generation is also going to be much more influenced by social media than by deep books, etc. That's the reality we live in. So which brings me to the question, perhaps I think there's been studies done when an author of an article tweets the article with something, those articles tend to be better cited. So perhaps we should include, as part of scientific communication to the public, also a tweet or something through social media. And I think some journals have started doing it. Like, for example, the Annals of Internal Medicine the author to provide tweet lines, which they include, etc. So I think some of that needs to happen by the author, and I agree with the comment that the authors need to be more involved in communicating the findings and its interpretation in a way that is succinct but still correct. I think that's going to be important, and you know, the role of journals is going to be very important in all of this. And one thing, you know, I often find it very rich each time that I have a publication and I have to go through the ritual of completing a conflict of interest form, because I think it achieves nothing, number one. The best way to guard the integrity of science is to ask that the authors deposit their data so that anybody can verify it. But that aside, if a journal were to ask me to display, reveal all my funders, the journal too should reveal all their funders in their issue. And a lot of the big journals, particularly the highly cited, high reputation journals, are funded by advertisements from pharma industry, and that should be made very transparent. So how is that influencing the journals? I think that's something as a consumer I want to know.
Paul Farrow from Oxford Pharmagenesis is pointing out that pharma companies are not allowed to communicate about products in social media. I think this is, the way I understand it, you're certainly not allowed to communicate, there's no direct to consumer advertising except in the US. No other country, as far as I know, has it. But I think you are allowed, and perhaps Paul will correct me, to communicate about research. So if you publish a paper that comes to some kind of conclusion. I mean,
well, the issue here is that it's far safer to not publish, of course, because it's very easy for anything to be construed as promotional. And as a result, of course, that is a significant deterrent. So what Kajsa was saying, in that maybe the rules are wrong, is perhaps that people, I don't think anybody necessarily wants DTC advertising to take over the world. Even the Americans would rather reverse the clock on that. But certainly the ability for pharma to communicate a little bit more openly would be desirable for sure.
I mean, maybe you can help us with this, Kajsa, but certainly I remember back at the beginning of Open Pharma, because people were very anxious about this not being allowed to communicate directly. But when we talked to regulators, and of course they didn't commit themselves completely about communicating about research. I mean, clearly there is no problem with pharmaceutical companies publishing research open access so that anybody anywhere can read it. There seemed to be a difference between promoting the product and promoting the research. But Kajsa, what do you think, and can you help us?
Well, clearly pharma companies are already on social media, but yes, it is on very specific legal terms around disease awareness, general corporate standpoints on sustainability issues, etc. Because it cannot, in Europe, should be said, be around product communication. It can in the US, however. So if you tailor your message or dark postings on LinkedIn, you can tailor it to your specific market under the specific rules of compliance there. So all companies today are on social media, but on the conditions sort of which is for that market, the laws right now being France. Then the UK probably. In Sweden, my own company, we have a stronger freedom of speech. And the US, of course, being totally open. So it depends. And then as a patient, it's a question of how savvy you are when it comes to ability to access knowledge. So the younger generation probably reads everything because they know how to access, go through VPNs and pretend that you're in the US with your laptop, and then you can read everything about all the products.
Durhane, did you want to say something on this?
Yeah, I just want to jump in. Absolutely. Thanks, Richard. And thanks, Kajsa, for setting it up. I mean, that's the challenge, right? Is that if we don't have pharma providing the information, then where do you get the information? And Kajsa's absolutely right. Most of us are very savvy about it. You go into the US. If I want information, and I tell our patients as well, you want information, go to the US websites. And pharma websites, you can go to the patient organizations websites, which are also heavily, kind of, material comes a lot from pharma. We just need to make sure it's accurate and that it's not kind of promoting, directly selling a product. But yeah, you go on and it asks you, are you a US, resident? You click yes. They said, are you I even tell people, it says, are you a patient or clinician? For God's sakes, click clinician, because you get all the information and you can get it. And I think that's sad. That's really sad. As you say, you got to be savvy. You got to be directed to it. But the challenge, I think, is in many countries, though, and again, we go back to some of our low middle income countries where people don't use English. Now you don't get the information at all. And even in countries where, people are well educated, in Japan, in Korea, where a lot of people, as ordinary people, do not use English as a working language, it's very hard to get access to that information. So I do think that we need to take account of what the reality is and provide some kind of a balance in terms of getting that information, because people want it, they need it, and they would like to get it from some source that at least has some reliability around it, rather than, when you go to social media, even patients know, facts don't matter anymore. You read social media and the first thing we say is look at it with the highest degree of skepticism you got, because most of it is not going to be fact-based. And, for people that are just willing to listen to to opinion and their own inner circle, I still have people, close to me who will say, so-and-so died because he took the vaccine. Okay, well, he also was a heavy smoker. He had a lung condition. And, I think he died of cardiac arrest, but that's okay if you want to think it's a vaccine. I'm not going to change your mind. But, we do need to give other people who are going to be trying to get that information some access to real information. And I think we're living in a world that is, not based on reality. We continue to have these rules that make it so that you do have to do workarounds, etc. So, yeah.
Let me just come to you in a minute, Paul, but just to clarify. So Tim Coder from Oxford Pharmagenesis has pointed out that the Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry just recently clarified loud and clear that the pharma industry may not post on social media about a particular medicine, even if it's only just the publication of a research paper. And then we've got another question that says, could there be a peer-reviewed intermediary, e.g. patient disease websites, that are peer-reviewed and written in plain language with more multimedia? Is there a role there? Paul, say what you were going to say, but if you could...
In answer to that last question, I'd say that a lot of patient groups, that is one of their primary functions, is to try and provide that kind of translation service, as it were. The only thing that I wanted to say was that I think we're a bit narrow-minded in thinking that the only thing that we can communicate about is products themselves. And of course, products are vitally important. They are what the pharmaceutical industry has traditionally only been able to really focus on. But I also think that we work in healthcare, possibly the most emotive of all industries and sectors that there is. I sometimes say, if Elon Musk can get people excited about batteries and Steve Jobs could get people excited about laptops, then we should really be able to get people excited about healthcare, and to talk about the future, to talk about what might be coming, to talk about how we might interact with our healthcare in the future, even before these things have necessarily been researched, approved, and claims can be produced. There is so much in the world of communication out there that can engage and can interest and can inspire us all to be better at looking after ourselves, or better at going and seeking that information, more detailed information ourselves. And I just think that I sometimes just lament about how many hours and how much money is spent going through medical legal review within pharmaceutical companies on every minute piece of communication. It actually stops the pharmaceutical industry being able to have a conversation, because everything has to be reviewed before it's released. And it's because
it's over-regulated. It's over-regulated, the pharmaceutical.
Well, unfortunately, there's a few bad actors that will take advantage of any lax regulation.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's a matter of being over-regulated. I think it's just that it hasn't been updated for a modern world. And I think that, people who aren't regulated can fill the void, as we've said multiple times here. It's about also what we're talking about and whether or not we should be just confining our communications to products, which is, I think, a little bit sad when there's so much more that we could talk about.
Right. As I said at the beginning, Venkat's got to go in a moment. I just want to
Yes.
give you an opportunity to say anything before you go, Venkat.
Yeah,
And
thank you very
for
much.
stepping in.
Thank you. This has been a very exciting conversation. I just want to say one thing, the broad picture thing, is that very clearly what we're discussing is we are entering an age where information is power, and there's democratization of information at all levels. That's something you're not going to be able to stop. At the same time, many of the institutions of democracy or of regulation are either getting weak or dysfunctional to suit the modern context. So I believe the only redemption is going to be to improve the quality of information, the rigor of information, the openness of information, and allow public forums to put out their views. I mean, if there's a new science, let that be tweeted or whatever, and let opposing views, opportunity for opposing views to be presented, so that all views. So I encourage all producers of research to invite not just people that support their research, but also people that are skeptical about it to have a say in the public forum, and that be disseminated widely. That's all. I think that would be the
right, Venkat, there's that marvelous quote by John Milton in Era Pagitica about, let everything come out, and in the end, truth will prevail.
Yeah.
I think not everybody's convinced by that, but it's a marvelous aspiration.
Okay, thank you all very much. Pleasure meeting you. Thank you. Bye-bye. It's me.
Well, thank you for stepping in, Venkat.
Bye-bye.
So
Bye-bye.
let me go round and give you, because we've just got a couple of moments left, and give you an opportunity to make any final remarks you want to make. Kajsa, where are you left with after this conversation?
That Durhane is brilliant as always, and absolutely right on everything. I just hope that the industry will be more daring, that we actually will see more, and it doesn't need to be simple, but just communicate more, communicate the difficulties, communicate the difficult research. Doesn't have to be plain language, but just do it.
So do you think there need to be
we want it?
Do there need to be changes in regulations, do you think?
Yes, I've been fighting for that for 20 years. And it's just going the opposite. So I should probably stop, and then maybe we might see some progress. Right.
I'm going to let you have the last word, Durhane, because you're so woof and Paul. Where have we got to here? Are we any closer to a better world?
Yes.
Big question.
We are so far advanced in terms of where we are. I mean, we can look and say how awful things are, right? But you think of where we are in terms of having access to information, in terms of patients being engaged, involved, in terms of being, having people like Kajsa who actually do sit as those intermediaries for us. Those are so important. And we are light years ahead of where we were in the old days, where everything was like dark secret and you had to. I'm actually very interested in a comment here. It says the average reading age is 10 years old. Do we really think people want? That average reading age of the 10-year-old are mothers and patients who are making decisions about what they're going to take, about their healthcare. We've got to get the information to them at a level that is understandable. That's our responsibility. And yes, it's patient groups is part of it, but I do think that we can bring pharma into it, and that pharma recognizing this is a bigger audience. The sad thing I was saying in the last comment is the problem for us, with all of us for social media, is when you've got a whole sector that says facts don't matter. I don't know that we figure out how to counter that. We can keep putting out the facts, and we keep doing the best we can. We can keep holding forums. We can ask, journals to not just publish, but hold, conversations. I love what The Economist is doing these days. They're actually holding dialogues. They're inviting people to come into these kinds of environments. We need to do more of that and use the media in many ways more than just assume that people are going to read, but to be able to get that information to people in forms that are digestible to them. But that's our audience.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Strong words at the end there. Paul, last word is yours before we wrap up.
Oh, I was thinking Durhane had the last word, because there's very little to add. I thought what she said there was absolutely right. I think that the only thing to add is that pharma can do it, and that our one-dimensional view of trust right now is perhaps the missing element that would enable us to be part of that conversation and to be able to have that, fill that void. We definitely should not resign ourselves. We should definitely recognize that we are just a very small part of the way to being able to provide genuine healthcare, and by that very fact, we are a young industry, not a mature one. We are unevolved, and we've got plenty of mileage to go.
Good. Well, thank you very much to all of our speakers. So all of this is going to be available on YouTube, and I invite you to come along to the next discussion, which is on the 24th of February from 2 to 4 o'clock UK time, when we're going to be looking at the question, is the current system of publication of pharma research fit for purpose? And the provisional conclusion here seems to be no. So I invite you to come along to that debate, and thank you very much. We'd all give a round of applause if we could. So we're very grateful to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.